if you are building a TCG business, you have a desire of some kind. That desire may be to build that cash flowing asset that you can own for a long time. That desire may be any number of things. I'm not going to get in the weeds on that. You also have your current reality. And so, if you're watching this, the reality is likely that you don't already have a large, sustainable, scalable, cash-flowing business asset in the form of a TCG store or side or hustle or brand or whatever. And so there is a gap between your reality and your desire. That gap is paved by obstacles, opportunity, and say risk. And we'll say gap. So you've got the gap between your desire and your reality, and that gap is filled with obstacles, opportunities, and risk. As you are building your business, you need to soberly and fully assess the current state of reality. What are the advantages and disadvantages that you have going for you right now? And then you need to assess, what is your actual desire? Not just 3 months from now, not just 3 years from now. What is it that you are working toward on a long time horizon? 5 years, 10 years. If you're bold enough, 30 years. That's the time scale that I'm thinking on, the things that I'm building. I want to build something that I will own in 30 years, and which transcends cardboard, but cardboard is a part of that. And so you need to figure out the full, what is the full scope of your desire, and what is the actual scope of your current reality. And then you identify, from that you can break down what is the actual total gap in who you are right now and who you must be to attain your desire, as well as the business infrastructure that will be required to transform your business from what it is in current reality into what it is that you desire. You will need systems. You will need employees. You will need leverage, brand. So I'll add some of this stuff in here. Systems, employees, brand, saleable assets. And I mean, the saleable assets, that is your network, depending on what type of business you're building, including in the TCG business. It's the network of people that you have access to. Distributors are a combination of inventory and network. And then like a retail store is largely an inventory thing, but also an event space. A retail store functions as a third place. So what are your saleable assets? In the case of most of you watching this video, it's probably going to be some combination of inventory and content, brand, creativity, that kind of stuff. So you got to figure out what are your saleable assets. You got to build a brand. You're going to need employee. You're going to need systems. These are the means by which, so these are your means or solutions by which you will address obstacles, opportunity, and risk. And I would even say not just saleable assets, but capital. And systems, I would build an infrastructure, but I'll just add infrastructure. So if you are someone like me, very small, I have an inventory right now of 22,000 cards, mostly bulk singles. One of my primary obstacles when I got started was when I started this business. I had my reality when I started this business in 2021 is when I first started selling cards. I had 3,000 Magic cards. Combination of my old collection and then the old collection of a friend. Both of us had been out of the game for quite a while, and I had been lugging these cards from apartment to apartment for like 5 years or something, long time. And so the state of my reality initially was that I had a little bit of inventory, but the obstacles, and so that inventory represented opportunity. But the obstacles I had are that I did not have knowledge about how to actually, like what the stuff is worth, or knowledge about how to go about selling it. I did not have brand. So I'd even add in here like knowledge and skill, but we can collapse that into one. Or I'll just write them out. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay. So I had a lot of obstacles, but inside of those obstacles existed opportunities, because my lack of knowledge was an obstacle for me, but it was also an opportunity because if I pursued the knowledge, did the research, learned what my cards were worth, how to list them, how to conduct the sale, and so on, then I could transmute. This is the interesting alchemy of business, is that you transmute obstacles into opportunities. You transmute the risk of losing money, which is guaranteed by merely existing. You will lose money every single day that you exist. You transmute some of that risk of losing money into the risk of not making money, and so on, or rather the opportunity to make money. And so the gap that I had as that small business is that I lacked skill, I lacked knowledge, I lacked the infrastructure, the sales infrastructure to actually list cards on a marketplace. I lacked capital to make any like big investments in software or a sorter or anything like that. I only had, I did have saleable assets in the form of inventory, but I didn't have knowledge and stuff like this video, for example. The saleable asset of this video is the knowledge, and I'm not necessarily selling it to you directly. I'm leasing it to YouTube, who perhaps one day maybe will pay me for it. Brand, I had no brand established. I had no employees except myself, and I had absolutely no systems in place. So I had no advantages, really, aside from the saleable assets represented by the 3,000 single cards that I had, unsorted unidentified, unconditioned, all of that. So I started acquiring knowledge, lots and lots of research, buying cards on TCGplayer to learn what is it like to be a buyer, reading through all of their FAQs and stuff like that, and all their resources, watching hours and hours and hours of video, until finally I got enough confidence to list a couple cards for cheap, $5 or something like that, and see what happened. And learned how to pack it into envelopes and stuff like that. And so now I did have a little bit of skill going in as well, because I actually had a background in retail and high level corporate inventory management. So I suppose it's not fair to say that I had no skills going in. So I did have some knowledge and skills, just not directly in the card world. Like I knew how to use Excel and CSVs and stuff like that. So I started acquiring knowledge. I started acquiring skills, learning more about packing and shipping, getting better at that, learning about how to condition and sort cards, and learning how to recognize playable or more valuable cards as I'm sifting, to prioritize what should and should not be listed, building. And so then I started building systems for shipping, systems for listing, systems and all that. And this was all with my first 3,000 cards. I ended up finding a system to acquire inventory. Back then I was using CardSphere, or I started using CardSphere to buy at low prices and then resell on TCGplayer for a little bit of a margin. I didn't have employees. I started building a little bit of a brand in the sense that I would include some pack-ins that had like a sticker and had my brand name, and got a couple repeat customers just on TCGplayer. And, I was accruing capital that I could then reinvest into more inventory and more shipping supplies and stuff like that. And I stayed small. I hit level 4 seller within a month or something like that. And then I kept selling for a little while. And then I hit the biggest obstacle in my gap at that time, which ended up being I had no more inventory and I didn't know how to acquire it. I wasn't familiar with Facebook Marketplace back then. I was living in a smaller town. I lacked confidence as just an entrepreneur and a salesperson, which even if you're buying, you're selling the idea of the transaction to the person. So it's all sales and persuasion. So I lacked the knowledge and skills required to contend with the obstacle of sourcing inventory to restock my store. And so I shut it down for years. I sold a couple thousand cards, made a couple $1,000s. And then I was like, all I have left is bulk. I'm just going to shut it down again and wait until something in here changes for me to then be able to address my prime obstacle, which is stock. So when I finally came back around in 2025, I started building the store again in 2025. I had acquired more inventory. I had gotten into opening up some Pokemon cards. I had a little bit of a collection going on. I wasn't planning to keep most of it. I had come across some other stuff. I had discovered Facebook Marketplace, and so I was like, oh, I can acquire bulk, and I can probably sell that. So I started building up inventory. I found ways to get free bulk and stuff like that. So I started constructing a system with my knowledge and skills to build a better infrastructure for acquiring inventory, sourcing inventory. And I began to develop a brand locally as someone who buys bulk at fair prices, so that I built a pipeline of people selling to me. And that increased the amount of saleable assets I had, which then allowed me to address the obstacle of having no inventory. And that turned then that obstacle into an opportunity because I had inventory. And so then I started converting that inventory into capital. And risk, of course, I haven't mentioned it directly, but it plays into all of this. There's risk entailed in acquiring inventory. You don't know what's going to be in there. You don't know what it's going to be worth. You don't know if you're going to make money on the inventory. You don't know if you're going to make a return on the time. There's risk involved in shipping. There's risk involved in you're doing business with a new customer. There's risk involved in all sorts of stuff. And so that is a factor that compounds with obstacles and makes it harder to address obstacles, because what is required to address the obstacle generally is a trade. You make an equivalent exchange with risk. So you start in a position, your current reality is a position of low risk, but you have the obstacles in your way, and then you make an equivalent exchange of taking on risk to convert those obstacles into opportunities. And then that is how you begin to bridge the gap to your desire. But of course it doesn't go quickly, because there are levels. And so I'm just going to write it over here. You're not going to be able to see it because of where I'm standing. But levels. There's levels to this. I'm going to try not to use this space. Your levels, you reach new levels in business by converting obstacles through risk into opportunities. And then when you seize those opportunities by your means, you reach new levels, which contain in them new sets of obstacles, risks, and opportunities. And you climb the ladder of the gaps in the ladder. So this is your ladder. And then these are your gaps. And that's your reality. And that's your desire. Can you see that? Yeah. So you've got all your gaps. You start down here in your current reality, and you climb the ladder, crossing those gaps as you draw closer to your desire. And so in your TCG business, I'll contextualize this, in my TCG business, some of these things have included setting a floor price. So setting a floor price means you increase your risk of not making money, and therefore of losing money on certain inventory acquisitions, because you're not going to liquidate everything quickly at a floor price. But by doing that, you transmute the risk of losing money on some of those things. Like you would be able to liquidate a higher volume of inventory at a lower price, but a higher percentage of those orders are going to go out at a net loss, perhaps of capital, but certainly of time. And so, depending on your risk profile and the opportunity spread that you have in front of you, you may or may not want to set a certain floor price, but you certainly eventually are going to want to set a floor price, and that was the case for me. My floor price varies generally between 15 cents and 25 cents. I almost never go below 20 cents though, and I only set 25 cents if I get really busy and I want to slow down my velocity. And this is just on TCGplayer. It would be different on different marketplaces because you get sort of a convenience exchange on a more shoppable marketplace like Shopify. But yeah, so my first gap was just not even knowing what I was doing, having no knowledge, no skills, having absolutely nothing in place here, or nearly nothing in place here. Then, as I built some of these means, I'm going to call these advantages, actually. So then, as I built some of these advantages, that permitted me to convert obstacles through risk into opportunities and descend to the next layer of the ladder inside the gap between my previous reality and my current reality on the path to my desire. So figuring out how to acquire supply. In my case, that is sourcing from card shops, sourcing bulk from card shops, and internet lots for sale. There it can be and is value in those if you arbitrage them correctly. And from Facebook Marketplace, establishing those relationships and learning how to seize those opportunities. The next thing that I recently started practicing and getting used to is doing collection buyouts through Facebook Marketplace. And I see that there's often collection buyouts in Facebook groups. What I'm not comfortable with yet is the risk of not having platform protection as a buyer. So I only buy collections locally, but I do eventually want to buy bulk and collections remotely and allow people to send to me based on buying parameters, and specific prices and stuff. Another another rung that I climbed, another gap that I bridged was with my floor price, of being able to more confidently acquire inventory and find ways to liquidate it in a way that would at least guarantee me some sort of floor profit. I'm starting to consider also taking my abundance of inventory that I've begun to amass and turn it into bulk lots that I sell at regular bulk pricing. If I acquire bulk at 1 cent to 4 cents and I resell it at 5 cents to 10 cents, I can at least break even on the bulk transaction and profit on what I sift out. So there's that. Slinging lots, play sets, stuff like that on eBay is something I want to experiment with. So those are ways that I'm going to start building more infrastructure so that I can start raising my average monthly sales floor. Right now, I'm selling between, I'd say, $1,000 and $2,000 a month. So I'm not making a ton of money with the TCG stuff right now. But now that I have 20,000 cards instead of 2,000 cards, my sales velocity and my sales floor, and since a lot of that is bulk staples, I've got a lot more stability. I'm not just like hoping for higher velocity singles and trying to chase down collection buys and stuff like that to sift out and sling singles that are higher value. I've got a more predictable sales floor that's based entirely on bulk and playable staples and stuff like that, where people I know every week, several times a week, someone's going to place an order for somewhere between 10 and 50 cards in Gundam or Union Arena, usually is where I get most of my bulk moved, but also in Pokemon, and not as much recently, but back in 2025, I was moving a good amount of lightly played Magic from back when I first started in 2021. I still have 2,000, 3,000 cards, 5,000. I think I have an inventory of 5,000 Magic now, and I have it almost all listed as lightly played. And so that's all. The next level for me is more systems to acquire saleable assets in the form of inventory. Also more infrastructure to distribute those saleable assets, meaning setting myself up to be able to sell on eBay, setting myself to be able to sell locally on Facebook Marketplace, setting myself up to be able to sell through Shopify. Also the knowledge now that I have acquired, setting myself up to sell that on YouTube and so on, and building infrastructure, building an email list to collect addresses to strengthen Shopify and diversify me and build an anti-fragile revenue stack so that I'm not reliant on platforms, and I reduce risk by converting obstacles into opportunity. So right now I have single platform risk because I'm only on TCGplayer. And if I take some of my inventory and allocate it to eBay instead, then yes, there's a risk. I am certain to get scammed as I try to start on eBay, because that's what happened to me before, and that's why I didn't go through with it before. But my risk aversion, my risk profile, my risk tolerance has changed. And so I can take on the risk of listing some stuff on eBay, accept the fact that it's going to reduce the opportunity of being able to sell those on TCGplayer specifically, accept the certainty that I'm going to get scammed, that I'm going to lose some money in the short term, for the opportunity of building a reputation on eBay so that I've got diversification. eBay and TCGplayer are owned by the same people, so there's obviously still some risk there. So that creates, there's another obstacle of then learning other platforms to sell on. Fortunately, I have thousands of hours under the hood in Shopify, and so I'm not really planning to get myself out on a ton of marketplaces before I build the Shopify. And then my long-term goal is to build a brand and build an infrastructure to move product on Shopify and build systems to do it profitably with employees through my knowledge and skills and capital. And then that is building all of those, amassing all of those advantages over the next, not weeks, not months, but years, is what will allow me to climb all of the gaps in the ladder between my current reality and that which I desire. And that is also the playing field laid before you. You got to figure out, what do you have going on right now? What are your advantages and disadvantages? What do you have and what are you missing? And what is the relative strength of all of these things on this list? What systems do you have in place? Do you have any? Or like every time that you get orders, or every time that you try to buy product, are you starting from square one, negotiating everything out, or doing brand new research? In this, do you have knowledge? Do you have skill? Are you used to shipping, or does it still intimidate you? How narrow is your knowledge? Do you only know Pokemon and only sell that? Or have you taken the time to start learning and diversifying into Magic or Sorcery or Union Arena or Gundam? Right now, I'm selling 3 games sustainably. I've got acquisition and sales infrastructure and knowledge to sell 3 games on the marketplace, which then I can take out to Shopify and so on. So your TCG business can be something big and cool and sustainable, profitable, scalable. It can be a cash flowing asset that you own for the rest of your life, or for 5 years or something. It could be a business that one day you build and sell, but only when you have an understanding of how to climb the levels of reality toward your desires. I hope this helps. Buy some cardboard from me at www.getdkc.com.